G'day, everybody. Nice to see everybody, and hopefully you guys can all hear us. First of all, welcome to First Friday with Eugen Bacon. I acknowledge the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation from whose lands this event is being broadcast today and pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands where you are joining us from today. Feel free to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box down the side. You will be muted for the whole event to ensure the best sound quality. Let us know also in the chat if you are having any trouble hearing us or are having any technical issues, and we'll do our best to help. When in doubt, the best solution is sometimes to exit the Zoom meeting and come back through the link in your email. If you'd like to ask a question or comment, we invite you to do so via the chat. We'll take as many of your questions as we can during the Q&A at the end of the event. Please feel welcome to chat with your fellow attendees throughout. To see our speakers, toggle your screen to speaker view in the top right-hand corner of the Zoom window. To see all the other attendees, toggle your view to gallery view, though we recommend you stay on speaker view for the entirety of the event. We are recording this event, so if you drop out or have to leave early, you can always watch it on our website later next week. Now, I will welcome author Ashley Kalagian Blunt, Writing New South Wales Senior Program Officer and the author of How to Be Australian, a memoir, and My Name is Revenge, a collection of fiction and essays. Over to you, Ashley.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today for First Friday Club with Eugen Bacon. I also acknowledge the traditional owners across Australia and on Eora Nation, where I'm currently speaking to you from, and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Today, I am super excited to be speaking to Eugen Bacon, who is, she's African Australian. She's a computer scientist, and she describes herself as mentally re-engineered into creative writing, which I think tells you a lot about Eugen. She's the author of Claiming Timo from Meerkat Press and writing speculative fiction from Macmillan, and so many other things. Eugen has this like fantastic just collection of books, and you can see sticky notes in them because they're so wonderful. And we're going to get into talking about all of her writing. This is one of her recent books. So her work has been shortlisted, longlisted, or commended in national and international awards, including the British Science Fiction Association Awards, Birdport Prize, Copyright Agency Prize, Australian Shadows Award, Ditmar Awards, the Nomo Award for Speculative Fiction by Africans. So her latest release is, like I said, the short story collection, The Road to Whoop Whoop, which is just one of my favorite titles ever, and Speculate, a prose poetry collaboration with Dr. Dominic Heck. So welcome so much, Eugen. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Ashley. Your enthusiasm is infectious already.
Thanks, Eugen. I want to start by sharing with everybody, if they didn't hear, it was recently announced that Transit Lounge has acquired the world rights to your new short story collection, Dangled Black Thing. So huge congratulations for that. Can you tell us about that collection?
Yeah, thank you. I was really impressed because for many years I've been trying to get into Transit Lounge publishing. They were my secret crush. I really wanted them to publish them, and they very nearly got Claiming Timo, but Meerkat Press sort of pipped them to it, and they very nearly got Major Fools, which is coming out in 2020, but again, Meerkat Press was faster. So when I sent Danged Black Thing to Transit Lounge Press, I wasn't sure how they would respond to it because I knew already that they liked my writing, but I didn't know whether they'd accept it. And what I said to Barry, the publisher, was read the first two stories and read the last two stories and tell me you don't like them. And so I was really confident. I was amazed when Barry wrote back and, he came back with an offer. So that just blew me away. And Dung Black Thing is dark fiction. It is literary strange. It's black speculative fiction. I'm very excited about it because the stories are really about othering. They're stories about writing the other. They're stories about betwixt. They're stories about hauntings. They're stories about unlimited futures. And they're all very different stories because in one of the stories, A Pod of Mermaids is a futuristic story that borrows from the Norse mythology, where you have Loki's wife Angerboda coming down to Earth, and she is really interested in little black boys because she's lost her own child. And it's about Loki's mischief and how he corrupts the little boys. And some of them are Idi Amin and all the terrible people on earth. But it's a story that I'm quite drawn to. And then I have another story called Unlimited Data, which is set in old Kampala. And it's about an illiterate woman in the village who gives everything for her husband, and it's cyberpunk where you hero the black people stories. That's just an example of some of the stories. Yeah. You're on mute, I think, Ashley.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for telling us about that. And this is one of the reasons I'm so excited to talk to you, is because you've just got such an incredible range of stories and approaches. You're just genre blending, and I love the phrase "literary strange." I haven't heard that before, but that's super. So I really love this is one of your most recent books, and I really love it. And I was hoping you could just read us a very short excerpt, just so people can who don't know your work can get a sense of your voice and just the incredible power you wield with language.
Oh, thank you. So that's Wrote to Whoop Whoop. And initially, when I wrote this collection, the title was A Pining, because the intention was writing stories that were a longing or a dash, stories of hope and stories of transformation. And I wrote an original story, The Road to Whoop Whoop, which is the theme story in this book. And Meerkat Press asked me, tell us a little bit more about Whoop Whoop. And so I wrote, it's a little epithet at the beginning that I'd like to read to you. And it says, she lives out Whoop Whoop, a no place filled with ghosts, random within her grasp, slipping in a language of desert, a mirage of memory in the middle of nowhere, the back of beyond, and loved by the camera. Who stands a chance? And so that's just a little example. And I'll tell you something. I taught myself English by reading, and I taught myself English using the African. Um, I speak Swahili, and so the Swahili vowels are very different from the English vowels. So where you say A, E, I, O, U, in Swahili it's A, E, O, U. And so I know that sometimes I say things differently, and that's okay. That's part of my diversity.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Actually, that's exactly what I want to talk to you about right now, is to quote your own writing, and this comes from a piece you have in the Sydney Review of Books, and we'll link to that in the chat. You write across forms: short story, poetry, novels, nonfiction. You write across genres, in a spectrum of literary speculative fiction. You're an African who is now Australian, who once lived in the UK and writes for readers around the world. And as I said before, you described yourself as a computer scientist mentally re-engineered into creative writing. So what led you to creative writing, and what was that re-engineering process like?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think I've always had a curiosity to explore. In a way, I have empowered myself by writing across form, in the sense that because I write speculative fiction, I write essays, I write, literary fiction. So when there's an anthology and someone says, we're looking for a science fiction contribution, and oh yeah, yeah, I can do it. We're looking for black fiction, yeah, 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 I can do it. You're looking for a fantasy story, I can do it. And so that has really empowered me. And I think I love writing across genre because it depicts my own duplicity, my own diversity. I am an African, Australian. I am a sum of many. I am a mother. I am a writer. I am an editor. I am a woman. I am a reader. I am a daughter. I am a friend. And I think all those multiplicities come into my writing. I find it really important writing about relationships. I find it important tapping into my culture as an African. I'll tell you a story. I was in a panel where we were getting ready to talk about our writing, and one of the panelists said that she never knew that she was bisexual until she wrote a bisexual story. And I think it's the same for me. I always grappled or struggled a little bit with my dualities. I was trying to be African, I was trying to be Australian. It didn't really occur to me that I could be both. And I was trying to fit in and trying to belong. And it took me a while to embrace my difference, to be comfortable with my difference. And when I started writing Black speculative fiction, when I started seeing myself in stories and characters that I could relate to, suddenly it actually helped me engage even more with my culture. And now I feel really strongly African and strongly Australian. And I think those aspects come into my writing and they weave themselves. There's a lot of the traditional. I hero the mostly women and children. I love stories of social justice or social injustice, stories that look at a different kind of Africa, stories that look at hope. What's a futuristic Africa? What would it look like? Some of them are stories of warning. They could be stories of climate fiction, where I look at the what if. So those are the type of stories that I write.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it makes sense that you have that flexibility as a short story author, because as you said, that allows you to get your work into a whole range of places. So it sounds like that having that versatility as a short story author is really a benefit.
It does a lot. And also because I'm a woman, in my stories, I can explore the place of women. As a mother, I can explore the value of children. I can, look into the meaning of death. I can look into the meaning of life. What are different values? There's always that curiosity. I say sometimes that I'm a little bit of a selfish writer because first and foremost, I write for myself. My writing is a curiosity. I am exploring a question. In writing, I am finding answers to the question. I never really know where the story is going to go. And I'm hoping that at the end of it, I will have found some answers to the question, or I'll find a different question that leads me to a different answer.
I love that description of yourself as a selfish writer as well. Do you think that like all writers should start from a place of selfishness with their writing?
Not especially. Writing is very subjective. We all have the different things that urge us to write. My urging to write is that exploration, that curiosity. I've always been very curious from when I was a child, and writing is to find meaning. I remember a few years ago when my elder sister Flora died of AIDS. It really hit me. And the very first thing that I did after that one big cry that, Flora, she let herself die, I was really angry because AIDS is, people shouldn't die of AIDS in today, but there's a lot of stigma back home. And nobody would say, somebody has HIV, they'd say, oh, it's pneumonia, or oh, it's malaria. Nobody would really say what it is. And I hadn't realized what I really felt until I opened my laptop, and it was the very first thing that I wanted to do. I wanted to write, and I didn't know what I was writing. I just wanted to write. And the story that came out made me realize that I was very angry. I was very angry that Flora had died. I was very angry that almost like she had let herself die. And in the story, there's a scene where the protagonist is actually a migrant, and I see myself in the protagonist because I needed that. I needed to be able to talk to somebody about what I was feeling. And she's talking to the psychologist, and there's a point where she says, it's not pneumonia, it's not malaria, it's not tuberculosis, it's AIDS, it's AIDS. And she's really angry. And that was very cathartic. And so my writing is cathartic. It's almost like a form of healing. And I find that over the past year with COVID-19 and with everything going on with the Black Lives Matter and what's been going on with the US elections, I have been writing a lot. I've been very triggered and stimulated because I wanted to write, why Black Lives Matter, and I wanted to write stories about, leaders who should not be leaders, and I wanted to write all sorts of stories that had meaning to me. So my stories were almost like a questioning, and my scream, it went into my stories. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and I can hear, all of those levels of multiplicity coming through in that when you sharing that. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's it sounds like an incredibly powerful story. So was that one of the first stories you wrote, or had you been writing for a while when you were writing about your sister?
I had been writing for a while. I think I've always loved writing. I was the kind of person in those days of letter writing where you actually took a pen and you wrote on a piece of paper. I loved writing. So my father encouraged me. He had a beautiful handwriting. And I remember in school my resentment because my teachers always used to say, your father has a really good handwriting. Why can't you write like him? But when I was away from him, he would write me letters and I would write back to him. And so the letter writing, in a way, was like storytelling. And then my father loved reading. And when I did well in school, he would reward me with books. So I grew up reading how and why stories, why the zebra got his stripes, or how the crocodile lived in the water. And I loved stories by Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Kamara Laye, the African child. And all these stories always triggered something in me, that curiosity. And I think speculative fiction works for me in that way because there's that how and why, that the what if is always there. Yeah, so I've always loved writing, but years ago when I was pregnant with my son, he's the only child and he knows it, I think. So I reached a stage where I had to take time off work, and I'm just not the kind of person who can, sit down and just twiddle with my thumbs. I needed to do something, and I did a writing course with the Writers Bureau, and I loved it. I enjoyed the whole experience. There was a competition where I submitted a story. It was about a writer who was really trying and they were struggling, and they were struggling in a relationship, and they were struggling to break it through. And I think I was writing about myself, but it won a competition, and I still remember I got 50 UK pounds for it. And it made me realize that there is something in my writing that perhaps I actually can write. And so I slowly continued writing. And I think my biggest breakthrough came when I did my PhD. Actually, just before that, when I did my master's of arts in writing, because every time I submitted an assignment, the feedback was always very enthusiastic. And sometimes we had to post our assignments for other student feedback. And I realized there was something in my writing that was doing something. And so it gave me access, and I began to network more. And I found access to journals. And it's somehow that really picked up my writing, and it continued from there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, you were born in a town at the foot of Mount Kilimanjaro. Now you live in Melbourne, but like I said, you've also lived in the UK. And you've talked about this a bit, but is there any more you'd like to tell us about your cultural and other multiplicities?
Yes, I was born in Moshi, which is very close to Kilimanjaro, and then my family moved to Kenya. And I find that a lot of my writing draws back to that African tradition. And I was saying this in another interview where things like naming are very important. And someone said to me, your characters have very distinct names. And it comes from the cultural inheritance, because back home, a person's name is very important. So if my name is Zawadi, Zawadi in Swahili means a gift. It means that I was probably a gift to my parents. Or if my name is Kurwa, you know that I am one of twins and I am the elder twin, and that the younger twin's name is Doto. Or if my name is Shida, maybe it means my parents went through some terrible difficulty, and they named me Shida. So things like naming are quite important in my stories. And then, part of the world building is the language. So when I'm inventing language or when I'm inventing a place, some of it, especially when I'm writing about a village, I can draw from that past, I can draw from that tradition. And, in speculative fiction, I don't really have to worry too much about what color are my characters, what language do they speak, because they could speak any language. It's all about the world building. And the world building includes, the clans, the layers that you put into the stories, the values. In my culture, the elders are very much esteemed, and so how I portray an elder in a story, how I try to shift the role of the woman in society, how I try to bring out the child, because back home children don't speak until they're spoken to, things like that. And it's funny how I say back home, because that's where my family is. Home is where your family is. But Australia is home to me as well. Melbourne is where I am. Melbourne is where my other family is. My son is here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if we developed our understanding of home so that it was always it was always multiplicitous. Like home is usually, for most people, it's almost never a singular thing. So I think if we as a society started thinking of home in the plural, that would actually help us better understand each other and in ourselves as well. So I love that you say that.
That's true. And I actually have never really belonged, which is a little bit sad in the sense that when I talk to my family, they see me as the other. Like my nephews and nieces have children, and they call me Nyanya Mzungu, which in Swahili Nyanya is the name for grandma, and Mzungu is the name that we call the white person. So they call me the white grandma. And when I speak Swahili, I speak it with an English accent, and when I speak English, I speak it with with a Swahili accent. And so I'm one of the people who's always been in between. And I think initially my primary goal was to belong, to really find that acknowledgement that I fit in. And now I've reached a stage where I'm very comfortable with myself. I don't notice that I am Black, which is very obvious. I don't, when people stare at me, when I get onto the tram and they stare at me, I'm thinking, oh, they like my hairstyle. I'm not thinking that it's because I'm Black, I'm the only Black person in a whole tram. It's just I've become comfortable with myself. And I think part of my writing is part of my acceptance with myself. And I am exploring all my multiplicities, and I am fine with where I am.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That makes me really happy to hear. Because I can relate. I feel a real sense of belonging in the writing community as well. And I think it makes sense that writers do tend to be people who come from liminal spaces, because that allows them to see the world around them a bit differently.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a very big the writing community in Australia, particularly let me talk about the speculative fiction community in Australia is very big. It's like a family. And I have really benefited from writing communities, because that is by networking. When you talk to other people, that is how you find out about opportunities. That is how you find out about, awards, you find out about what anthologies are happening, you can celebrate each other's successes. Recently, one of our Australian speculative fiction writers, Aiki Flint, had passed away, and in the whole build up to it, you could see the community support. We posted videos for her online. We read her stories, we did everything. And it was quite a blow when she finally passed away. But it's the strength of the community, and especially last year with the pandemic, when you didn't really have people to talk to, And for me as a migrant, my family is back home and my son is a teenager, hanging out with mom is not so cool. And so it's the community that really I feed from it and I thrive from it. I feel that sense of belonging, which I still secretly yearn. It's amazing. So even writing New South Wales, Writers Victoria, there's the Canberra Speculative Fiction Guild. I am a member of organizations like the Australian Horror Writers Association, and it's all very important because you get that community and you get that community of practice. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. So like I said, I feel that intense belonging to the writing community as well. So I'm glad to hear that other people have that experience. Now you touched on this before, but I'd like to ask you a bit more about how the events surrounding Black Lives Matter affected your writing.
It affected it very, very much in the sense that I found that a lot of my writing was hinging onto it. And I'll talk about this. At the moment, I'm working on a collection of illustrated microfiction, and the title is Divok, which is sort of like a reverse of COVID. And it's dark microfiction, but it looks into the dystopian nature of our world, and it also it pays attention to the killing of George Floyd in 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It looks at the Black Lives Matter. There's a lot of I can't breathe in the writing, and it also carries themes of love and war, of life and afterlife and hope and dystopia. And it's, in a way, it's almost like a philosophical assortment that looks at, it questions the normal world, because what is normalcy? It embraces opposition. It takes interest in difference and interest in peculiarity. I have been really fortunate because, in a way, Black in Australia is very different in the sense that usually when people think Black, they think First Nations, Indigenous. And so my Black is not really understood. It's a different kind of Black. And so the African migrant is in a way in a different kind of classification. I am an other, and there is a very big speculative fiction community in the US and in the UK as well. They do a lot of Black writing and Black speculative fiction. And so I have been very fortunate in that they have embraced me as their own, and they include me in events, in conferences. They invite me to participate in anthologies. And so very recently, there's an anthology called Sogam and Spear, where you sort of the African people stories, and they invite me to this. And so in a way, that's also another community. I think I'm the kind of person who can relate to many people. And so I tap into a lot of communities and I can engage with different people. I have collaborated in writing with others, with men, with women, with people from different cultures. It's part of my, I think, part of my being a relationship person, but also part of me being curious about other people, curious about other cultures, curious about different styles, different approaches.
Amazing. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to remind everybody, if you have questions for Eugen about, particularly, she's a fabulous short story writer, but she's also an editor. So pop your questions into the chat and I will be getting to those. But first, I have a few more questions before we started the event. Eugen and I have been like emailing and talking on the phone, but this is the first time we've actually sort of done something together and seen each other live. And so Eugen said, like, oh, it's kind of like our first date. So
Yeah.
asking my questions for a few more minutes. But I do want to ask about short stories, because if you don't know, Eugen is going to be running our online feedback short story course, which is basically for short story writers. It's a chance to submit drafts of short stories, and it's a purely feedback-based course, and Eugen gives just super insightful, in-depth feedback. So this is a chance to get really in-depth feedback from just a phenomenal writer and editor. So what makes a great short story in your opinion? As you were developing your short story skills, were there any particular insights that changed your approach to the process?
That's a really good question, Ashley, particularly because writing can be very subjective and also the perception of a short story. What is a short story? It could be microfiction, it could be sudden fiction. There are short stories that go as long as 7,500 words, and it really differs. And sometimes when you talk to people, ideally you think a short story has a certain immediacy. You write about a moment in time, you have just very few characters, and what really matters is the beginning, the hook, how you bring your reader right into the story and then immerse them in it for that brief moment, and then you pluck them out into, bring them back to the ordinary world. But short stories are very subjective, and I say this as a reader because I read lots of stories, and I also read for Aurealis. I read for Cosmic Roots and Eldritch Shores. I've also been a judge, and I am a judge at the moment in various short story competitions. I also speak as an editor, and so a story that works for me might not work for you, and that's okay. But you do get some commonalities. The stories that really work for me, I always bring it back to Franz Kafka's words. You look for the kind of story that sort of wounds and stabs you. You look for that story that shakes you, it leaves you changed. You look for that story that's like a blow to the head, and you read it and it takes you to a place, and at the end of it, you're still thinking and contemplating about it. It's that kind of story that is like an axe for your frozen sea inside, and it just breaks something within you and it stays with you. That's what makes a beautiful short story. It makes a powerful short story, and it doesn't matter what genre it is. It could be literary fiction, it could be horror, it could be science fiction, fantasy, it could be, just any story. That's the kind of story. And what when I'm reading stories, especially for the magazines, people don't realize this, but you don't have time for, when I was an egg and really build it up, because your hook is very important. The short story doesn't give you the luxury of what a novel might give you, because in a novel you can build it up, you can have a prologue, you can have your chapters that build up to the character, and by the end of the story you've taken your reader to a journey. But with a short story, it's that hook. If you don't get me in the first two pages, you've lost me, and that's what you want to try to avoid. That very first line is your hook. It doesn't matter what you call the story, the naming doesn't really matter, but just invite me into the story, hook me into it, and then the middle is where you take me with that story, because that's really important. The journey, immerse me into something. So I'm a very immersive writer, and I'm also a very immersive reader. I want to read and laugh with your character, I want to cry with them, like really put me into it. And then the end, how you leave me at the end of the story is so important, because you could write beautifully, and if the ending is just meh, you've lost me. I won't stay thinking about the story. And so that all really matters. And so it's really that, the immediacy of the short story. It's about the character, but how you tell the character. You can build your character in your dialogue. You could have your character, in just a single sentence, and the reader knows everything about that character. So it's really about that sharpness, just, like being tight, and don't lose the reader. You need to keep them there. It's a short time, it's a short space. That's, to me, that's what a good short story is.
And I just want to again, I'm obsessed with this book. I'll just randomly pull out one of your first sentences just to illustrate that. And this is just one random story I opened it up to. She fell from the sky, a daughter of the sun. Like there's a first sentence that just grabs you. And I just want to show everyone. Also, this book is full of this gorgeous artwork as well.
Yes, the artwork is by Trisha, the publisher, and she pleasantly surprised me, because I wasn't expecting Road to Warp to be illustrated. And so she's chosen some stories to include the artwork. But yes, that first line, your hook, yeah, Your hook is so important. And, even in awards or when you're judging a story, whether you want to stay, whether you just want to abandon it. Like, in a way, you already have a judgment by the first 2 pages, and then towards the end, it compounds what you felt about the story, that you really liked it or you absolutely hate it.
Mm. And do you find it's true that in the submissions that you look at, that people often, it seems they've spent more time on their opening, but not as much time on their closing?
Yes, some of them rush the closing, like the closing comes in a way that just leaves you flat. And the beauty of a short story is that it's very flexible. You don't have to finish it. It's not like a novel where you have to wrap it up very cleanly, because you could leave a short story in such a way that the reader is still thinking about it. You don't have to say, this is just an example, they got the job, or you don't have to say that, they won the award. It could finish with them clicking an email and you don't know what the email says, and that's okay, because that's the power of the short story. It's very flexible. You can go anywhere with it, you can do anything with it, but it's the intention is to leave the reader thinking about it. You don't have to wrap it up neatly, but also don't leave them feel cheated, like it was all a dream. That doesn't work.
Oh, I'm learning so much about how to improve my short story game. Thank you, Eugen. Um, you're also an editor, and we've touched on this a bit, but I think that just gives you such a different insight. And also being a judge, I was just a judge for the first time myself, and I've learned so much from that process. So my question is, how can an editor be most useful to a writer, in your opinion?
I think an editor is also a very subjective role, in the sense that not everybody is the best editor for you. You need an editor who understands your voice. You need an editor who doesn't try to insert themselves into your story. You need an editor who will bring out the best form of your writing, and in such a way that you don't feel cheated. You don't feel that they've taken something and you look at the finished product and it doesn't look like something you've written. And I remember feeling this way once in the past, where an editor was very intrusive, and at the end of it, I absolutely hated the story, and I never used it at all. I couldn't stand the story, because looking at it, it wasn't my story. This is wasn't what I wrote. And that is what you don't want from an editor. And it also works the same way to a reader. When you give your work to a reader, you need the reader who's the right reader for you, in the sense that you don't want a reader who will praise everything about the story. Don't give it to your partner. Don't give it to your bestie. Give it to somebody who will really understand the story. But also don't give it to somebody who will just shred it to smithereens and you never want to write again, because the intention is not the death of the author. You want to encourage them to keep writing, but to write, a better version of it. So, as a writer who's also an editor, or any writer, you end up being the very first reader of your work. But I also have to acknowledge that I have blind spots. So, my writing is like a baby, and no mother really says their baby is ugly, even if it's ugly. But I can tell you, my son is beautiful. So, it really helps to have somebody else, and this is what I call a trusted reader or a trusted editor, who will read it and whose opinion you value. And so when they look at it and they say, they look at areas where you could make it stronger, you trust them. It's not quite a blind relationship, because you can take the good and you can leave the bad, but they say it in such a way that it doesn't break you. But also, as a writer, you can't be too precious, because you might think something is absolutely wow, but it isn't. And you need somebody else to look at it and to give you that objective feedback. But you have to understand that also, reading is subjective. So if they don't like it, that's okay. But if they need to tell you what it is about it that they don't like, and then you can have that assessment to see whether you need to do something about it.
Amazing. So we're going to open it up to questions very, very soon. So if you have questions, pop them in now, and we should have a chance to get to them. I'm going to ask one more question first, though. We
You're
talked,
very greedy, Ashley. You're hogging the spot.
I want all the questions. We talked about powerful openings. We talked about powerful endings that leave you questioning. We talked about well, we talked about a lot of things, but specifically for authors, for short story authors seeking publication, do you have any advice for them?
I think, yes, the beautiful news is that short stories are becoming more visible. They're coming back into, people love them. People are beginning to love them. There was a time, I remember years back, people were saying, short stories don't really have a market, or you could send short stories to publishers and they were really, really hard to place. But there are lots of anthologies happening. There are lots of short story competitions. There's a lot happening with short stories. You can build up your themed collection of short stories. And so short stories are the thing. I love short stories because I'm primarily a short story writer. And usually also when I write the longer form of writing, I actually hide little stories inside my novel. I write my novel story by story, where a chapter could actually be a short story in itself. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Or I could have little parts within a chapter that are actually little short stories, microfictions that I've hidden into them. And so with short stories, just look out for competitions, look out for anthologies, look out for journals, because it's really about your folio. People are going, it's like the chicken and the egg. People want you to be published, but they don't want to publish you if you haven't been published before. And so you need to build up that folio. Try to get your work published as much as you can, but also you need to look to see where it's being published. You need to be selective in who is publishing your work, because that really adds to the merits of your folio. But definitely anthologies, competitions. I love reading anthologies because that is how I've discovered a lot of writers. I tend to be very loyal in the sense that I love Toni Morrison. When I read Beloved, I went out and bought everything Toni Morrison. I love Anthony Doerr. He's very colorful in his language. And when I wrote his short collection, I bought the other collections. I love Michael Ondaatje, and when I read Divisadero, I went and bought everything Ondaatje. So that's how loyal I am. But when I read an anthology, it introduces me to someone, and that's how I discovered Karen Warren. I read an anthology where she was published, and I just absolutely loved her writing. She's a dark fiction writer, and she's beautiful. And that's how I discovered Angela Slater, who are Australian writers. And there's so many ways to discover new writers just through their collections. When you read a collection, like for example, I'm okay that if you read The Road to Whoop and you like some stories but you don't like all of them, and that's okay, because reading is subjective. So something will work for you, something will not work for you. But I'm hoping that by reading the collection, you'll find something. You'll find a few stories that talk to you, and that's important. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I love that response. Thank you. Okay, we're finally gonna get to some audience questions, and we've got a whole bunch of audience questions here, so that's fantastic. Okay, we've got a question from Lou. Were you a member of a writing group when you first started, and do you have beta readers?
I don't have better readers as in better readers because I'm a bit of a fastpot. I choose who I trust. So I do have trusted editors. I have two or three trusted editors whose judgment I really trust. And it's those that I've never submitted a story to a publisher that hasn't been through a reading and a certain type of editing where I know that, this is the best quality of the story that I can send it to. When I started off writing, I realized the importance of a writing community. So when I came to Australia, I was part of Writers Victoria. I joined the Australian Society of Authors. I've joined Writing New South Wales. Like, the community of writers is so important. And you find out so much from the newsletter. You find out what awards are happening. You get more exposure, you get more visibility, you discover new works, you discover new writers. That's it, you get opportunities. So i i I think from the onset I valued community. I'd always encourage it. It's very important to be part of a writing community.
Thank you. That's great. And yeah, our newsletter Newsbite comes out on Mondays, and we often have a lot of different short story competitions and anthology call outs, and a lot of opportunities for writers. So make sure to check those out to see where you could be sending your short stories or your other writing, because we include writing, all kinds of writing opportunities. This is a great question. Through your work as a reader, a judge, and an editor, what changes are you seeing in the kinds of speculative fiction that's being written and published, and how is it changing?
I find that we steal from the everyday, we steal from what is happening around us. And so there are a lot of climate change stories, there are a lot of Black Lives Matter stories where you get, people are writing more about the other. Things that happen, pandemics, fiction is changing, and speculative fiction is very welcoming. It's very encouraging to different kind of topics and themes. I think writers are beginning to explore a lot more because there are lots of avenues in which to get published. You don't have to write in the traditional way. It's not about fun fiction or about certain themes, niche writing. You can almost write about anything and find a market for it. I think that's the change that I'm finding, that there's an openness as to the themes and the things that you can write about.
That's wonderfully encouraging. Thank you so much. Here's another great question. What advice would you give to an emerging speculative fiction writer to help them build a career and connect with others? Of course, you already talked about joining organizations like the Australian Society of Authors, Writing New South Wales. But what other advice would you give?
I'd say write, write, write. Take every opportunity to write something, because writing in a way is a skill or a craft. If a doctor stopped practicing, he'd have to do a refresher. And so the more you write, the more you hone your work. But also read. Don't write more than you read. By reading other people, it's almost like you understand the quality that you're aspiring to. You can almost think of it as competition, because when you read the other person's writing and you're going, wow, could I write like this? It makes you realize you can almost understand where your writing is at and where you need to lift it at. You also understand what other people are writing about. So write as much as you can, read as much as you can, and then just submit, submit. Don't be daunted by rejections, because rejections are not personal, although some of them feel personal. You get some really rude editors and publishers, but don't build a shrine of rejections. My book, I don't have it here with me at the moment, Writing Speculative Fiction, which was published by Macmillan, was rejected numerous times, including by Macmillan. But I kept reworking it, recrafting it, and I sent it back to them and they said yes.
Wow.
So yeah, don't give up. Rejections are not personal. Just it might mean they're not the right publisher for you, or they were looking for something, it just wasn't your story. But there's a place for your story somewhere.
That is fantastic advice. And this question sort of follows on nicely from that. So Melissa asks, do you have a special place or time of day for writing?
Not really, because I also work full time. I was saying to Ashley before we started this, probably not Ashley, I say this to someone else. I work as a communications manager because my background is in IT. And so I worked in IT for quite a while before I moved into communications. And my first breakthrough came in corporate communications. And so I find that most of the jobs that I am in are usually IT related. And so, with my day job, writing, I still time to write. And so I write in my head, I have little scraps of paper everywhere. So like during the day, I'd probably have little things where I scribble things. This is how I write my stories, bits and bits, anything. I email myself. I could be walking, taking a walk around the botanical gardens, and an idea hits me. So I send an email to myself so I remember. Or I could be sleeping and something hits me and I wake up and I have to write it because I won't sleep otherwise. So I still moments. I love to have space and time to actually finish the story. And so, this is my workspace. When I want to finish something, I like to sit at the computer and write something. But I've been writing the story in my head and on little scraps all through the day.
Oh, that's fabulous. I love to hear that you're able to achieve all this while you have a full-time job. I think a lot of emerging writers struggle with that, but it's great to hear that you can do it. And I also am glad to know that I'm not the only person who emails myself all the time.
I actually used to resent my day job because I kept thinking I just want to reach a place in my writing where I can write full time. And right now, I think if I had that opportunity to write full time, I'd be very bored because I have taught myself to manage my time, but also that every day has stories. I could be in a drama, and that's where I get my new character. I could be listening to a conversation, and when you think of it in another way, there's your dialogue already for your character. There's so much in there every day, we still are stories, and you could find another story from your day to day.
Oh, fantastic. All right. So Kate, we've got lots of great questions. So we'll try to get through these all. Kay asks, which form of writing is your favorite? And I know you combine genres. So tell us about how you combine forms.
I'd say I am mostly a literary writer. And when I talk about literary, what it means is that I like the rhythm of text. I like poeticity. I love metaphors and imagery. And when I think of the writers that I adore, like Toni Morrison, Anthony Doerr, they're the writers who can really they paint something with imagery, and people always say show don't tell, and that's what metaphor does for you, and that's what imagery does for you. And so when I write, I actually read it out loud and just listen to the musicality of the text. And usually when reviewers give feedback about my writing, they talk about the poeticity, they talk about the literariness, they talk about the playfulness, and those are the things that are important to me, which means those are also the stories that I enjoy reading. But that is me. You might like something different. Yeah.
Fabulous. All right. Emily asks, uh, two questions. One, did you find it easier to get published after you're completing your PhD? And also, what are your views on the speculative fiction communities in Australia compared to the US and the UK?
Those are really, really good questions. Yes, I found that my PhD it opened networks for me. It's almost like once I didn't even have to finish it. When in my bio I put it that I was a PhD candidate, in a way, first it gave somebody the opportunity to want to read the story. And that's what you want when you submit it to a journal or to a magazine. You just read the bloody thing. You just want somebody to give it a go, just to read it. And that really helped in the sense that, I don't know why they felt that it was a validation, because I was still the same person. But also, I think in a way, by doing the PhD, it opened my mind to quality, because all throughout the candidature, I was getting feedback from different people, and it helped me understand my writing. And now I can look at my stories and I know which is a really strong story. I know which one works and which one is not working, because suddenly you can see your work in a different way. And then talking about communities, it's a little bit unfortunate that the speculative fiction publishing in Australia is not as big as it is globally. And so I gained global recognition before I gained recognition in Australia. And still there are people who probably don't know my name. It would be like, Eugen who? It's Yeah, there's a very big speculative fiction world outside Australia, whereas here the big focus is on literary writing, and it doesn't matter that what I write is literary speculative fiction. In a way, people almost feel like, speculative fiction is navel gazing, but it's not, because you can write about really important things. You can write about realistic things, but in a way that makes people notice. You can write about things that are almost unspeakable, but because you write them in a speculative form, you're able to address these topics. And so you can write about climate change. What I talked about before, you can write about the place of women. You can talk about, Black Lives Matter. You can talk about slavery, colonialism. You can talk about all different kinds of things, but in such a way that it is acceptable to the reader, because by putting it in that speculative form, in a way, you make it approachable. And so Australia has a long way to go. Although there's a very strong speculative fiction community, and they're very niche publishers who publish speculative fiction, like IFWG Australia, but also you find writers like Alan Baxter, who publishes his own work and he's globally known, Karen Warren, who I spoke about before, and Angela Slater. They've been published in the UK and the US, and people know them, and they're invited to international conventions, but Australians don't really, the household Australian doesn't really know them that well, because it's not quite a big market here. And I hope that will change. So Transit Lounge Publishing accepting my collection, that was a very big thing for me, because Transit Lounge Publishing is literary publishing, and they're quite renowned for quality. And I noticed today that one of their books has been longlisted in the Stella Awards. And so that's really great. And I hope more publishers, including the big five, will give speculative fiction the importance that it needs.
Right. Oh, and we could probably talk about that for ages, but I want to get to, we've got a few more questions, so we'll try to get through these in the next 5 minutes or so. Luke, and this follows on well, Luke asks, do you think this decade will need science fiction stories more than ever to lead us to a good future?
That's a tough question, in a sense that, well, think of where we are now. This is a dystopian world, like with the COVID-19 and the pandemic. And when you look back, there are people who've written about pandemics and people who've written about, what ifs. And a lot of those what ifs that were there 10 years ago are in the now. And so the things in the now, people will probably write about them, in the future as well. So there's a lot of science fiction and speculative fiction in the everyday. So I think there'll always be a place for science fiction and a place for speculative fiction at any time in any era. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, we've got 4 more questions. So, do you have a literary agent or do you submit your work directly to publishers? That's a question from Lena.
Thank you, Lena. I have been submitting directly to publishers, and I still do. I do have a literary agent, but it's only for specific works. What I did was, when I signed up with them, it was for 2 specific works, and it's not because I needed them to place the works. They actually approached me at a time when I wasn't looking for a literary agent. And so I think to this point, I'm still questioning the value of a literary agent, in the sense that in the US, you definitely most often need to have a literary agent before a publisher will touch your work. But you also have small presses and other presses that are very open to, work from unagented writers. In the UK, you get publishers who won't look at your work without a literary agent. And so there is some benefit, I think, in having a literary agent to help you approach those kind of publishers. But in Australia, I don't know whether you really need a literary agent to get your work published. Most of my works have been published before the literary agent. Yeah.
Fabulous, thanks. We've got a few more questions. Audrey asks, what is the difference between an editor and an assessor?
Yes. They're almost similar but different, in the sense that an editor is working with your work in the aim of bringing out the best form of itself, whereas an assessor is looking at your work to judge it, almost to grade it or to rate it, whether it's to make a mark or it's almost like it either fits or it doesn't. That's my thought, and I'm thinking of an assessor as a judge, for example. So whether the work is going to make the long list or not, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And
And an editor is your friend, or an editor should be your friend, because if they're not your friend, if they're not bringing out the best form of your work, or if you get your work from an editor and you really feel like you never ever want to write again, I'd say fire that editor. You don't need them.
excellent. And I think in terms of writing New South Wales, we do manuscript assessments. So our assessors are more, they're sort of looking at your work and suggesting to you like how it might be viewed by a publisher in terms of the current publishing, what's being published and what publishers are looking at, and then offering you some guidelines on how you might best reapproach it, what your next draft could look like, that kind of thing. Whereas, as Eugen said, an editor is actually working on your work with you.
Yeah, that's a really good way to respond to that one, Ashley. It's actually a better response than mine, because you look at the assessor from the different perspective, an assessor who's assessing a manuscript. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, like, as you pointed out, that word is just, can be used in so many different contexts. So, but in terms of writing New South Wales, like if you see manuscript assessment, that's what's happening there. So Kim asks, in, COVID-19 world, particularly since you live in Melbourne, have you found the lockdowns and limitations on movements have helped your writing, or have they hindered it?
They've really, really helped my writing, which is quite different from other writers' experiences. I find that sometimes an adverse situation can either give you writer's block. And I'll give you an example. Years ago, I went through a separation and a custody battle. And for 2 years, I couldn't write. There was nothing in there. And I remember after those 2 years, when I was able to write a short story, I actually cried, because it was just, I never thought I'd ever be able to write again. Whereas in the other example, where when my sister Flora died, the very first thing that I wanted to do was to go and write. And so COVID-19 and the pandemic and, Black Lives Matter has really helped me write more. I've never written more in my life, and I've been very, very productive. I get very focused and very prolific when I'm at my best. And I find that the past year I have been at my best. Sometimes I wonder how I did it, just in the sense that I need to give myself time to rest. And the ideas just kept coming. And usually when I have a story idea, or something that I need to write, it just pokes at me, it prods at me, I just have to write it. And that's what it was. For some reason, the past year has really triggered me to write a lot.
Amazing. And that's so interesting, and there's, how everybody responds differently, and one person might respond differently at different times in their life. One last question. Has your work as an editor had an impact on how you approach your writing?
I think I'm a little bit more objective, in the sense that when I write the first draft, I can look at it with my editorial eye, and I know that it's not there, because I'm looking at the beginning and I'm thinking, nah. I'm looking at the ending and it's not just quite doing it. Or I'm looking at it and I'm thinking it needs a little bit more layering, it needs a little bit more specificity. The quality is not there. I know that I can look at a work and I know that I can't send this to anybody yet. And that's the editor looking at it. But I still need an editor to guide me. I have those blind spots, and so I need somebody to look at it, because there will be typos, there will be things. This is my cultural background, this is how I say things. There are things that are very clear in my head, but they're not clear to somebody else's head. So somebody has to look at it. And so I think I'm a better writer as an editor, but it doesn't quite fix me. I wish I edited my work as well as I edit other people's work.
Always different with your own work. It's so different. Susan, you are so generous and so incisive. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you today, and I highly encourage any short story writers in my audience right now, check out Eugen's course, which opens Monday, but we'll be taking enrollments all through next week, because the first submission date, if your first submission isn't due until the 15th of March. So check out Eugen's course. If maybe we can pop the link in the chat box if it's not there already. But it's a fantastic opportunity to work with an incredibly skilled writer and editor. Eugen, you're just a powerhouse. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I feel humble. I'm very blessed that you invited me here. And thank you so much to everybody who came. And yes, I'm looking forward to reading your stories, because I love the short story. I think the short story is my sweet spot. So please send in your short stories.